these neutralization studies aren't a really good correlate or a perfect correlate for how the vaccines are going to behave in the real world. And if anything, they're a correlate for what the protective value of the vaccine is going to be against infection, not against symptomatic disease and severe outcomes, where there should be more residual protection from all of these vaccines, including 2 doses. We now have 3 data points that have come out in the last 24 hours. In addition to the Pfizer data, there was 2 other neutralization studies, one out of South Africa, one at the Karolinska Institute, which both showed a significant reduction in neutralization after 2 doses of vaccine. But they both also showed that people who were infected and then subsequently vaccinated with 2 doses had a pretty robust response against Omicron. And that so-called hybrid immunity, situations where people are infected and subsequently get vaccinated with 2 doses, we know that is a good correlate for the behavior of 3 doses. So that should be another data point that suggests that a 3-dose vaccine, a properly boosted vaccine, should be protective in these settings. And so I think you now have 3 data points that suggest that, including the Pfizer data. We'll see other studies come out. Some won't look as good. There'll be a lot of variability between these neutralization studies. But I think the balance of the evidence right now is pointing in an optimistic direction.
Some people looked at that South African study and said, OK, the takeaway is that the 2 doses, fully vaccinated people without the booster, Pfizer's vaccine doesn't work as well. Why does this data shoot that down?
Well, this data doesn't shoot that down. I think across all these studies, we're seeing that 2 doses, the protection offered by 2 doses is significantly diminished. It's not going to be lost. There is some indication that there's residual protection against infection from these neutralization studies. And remember, these neutralization studies also don't take account of other components of immunity, like memory B cells and T cells, which might not protect you from getting infected in the first place, but will protect you from developing symptomatic disease and certainly severe outcomes. And so just because you see the neutralization studies indicate that there's not a lot of protection or perhaps no protection in some of these studies doesn't mean that the vaccines aren't going to offer a measurable degree of protection against bad outcomes. That's why these neutralization studies aren't a perfect correlate for how the vaccines behave in the real world. But I think the more optimistic finding from these studies is what we suspected, which is that a properly boosted vaccine is going to provide a meaningful level of protection against Omicron. I think that thesis still holds. Obviously, we're going to need to see clinical data to reaffirm that.
Hey, Scott, we were talking to Meg about this earlier. You know, many of the anecdotal stories that we've heard about a number of Americans who have come down with Omicron have had the booster. Should we think about that strictly as just another breakthrough case, or you think there's something else going on?
Well, look, it's a breakthrough infection. We're seeing breakthrough infections even with the Delta variant. What happens is a lot of these cases get reported and they sort of skew our perception, because situations where someone who has Omicron and might go into a congregate setting with vaccinated people and no one gets infected, you never know about those instances. And those instances are happening, too, very clearly, because there's more imports into the country than we're keeping track of. This looks like a highly contagious variant. It looks like it's airborne. Those are things that we know from the data coming out of South Africa. That doesn't mean that this vaccine isn't going to protect. And it doesn't mean that it's not going to protect against symptomatic disease and particularly severe outcomes. I still come back to what I said earlier last week, which is, we might end up with a vaccine that's 40, 60, 80, 90, where you have 40, 50% protection against infection, 60% protection against symptomatic disease, 80 to 90% protection against severe disease and bad outcomes. That would be a meaningful result. That's still a meaningful level of protection. That's probably more protection than people who are 6 to 8 months out from 2 doses have against Delta right now. So if that's where the boosted vaccine ends up against Omicron, I think that's going to be sufficient to provide a pretty good backstop against really bad outcomes, assuming people go out and get the boosters. And, I think you're going to see significant uptake of the boosters now. People are recognizing the importance of those. So, I would continue to encourage people to go out and get those boosters.
Scott, very quickly, your read on this. The market took this as really good news. Futures for the Dow went from down by about 50 points to up to about 200. It's come back down to up 62. Is this the right take, that maybe this is not going to lock us down for months or to slow the reopening?
Look, I think we have the tools to deal with this. It's not just the vaccines. We have orally available drugs hopefully coming on the market. We have monoclonal antibodies that are preserved. We have massive amounts of testing and screening where we can use testing, tracking, and tracing to keep tabs on this. It's still unclear, what course this is going to take. The conventional wisdom is that we caught the beginning of an epidemic curve in South Africa, and we're seeing the steep part of the curve. We also may have caught the epidemic while it was underway, and the transmissibility of this may not be what it appears right now. I think another week or two of data, we're going to have a better handle on that.